The year is 495 of the First Age. Morgoth now dominates most of the north, but three powerful elven kingdoms still stand against him: Gondolin, Doriath, and Nargothrond. Morgoth has no idea where Gondolin is. Doriath is protected by the magical barrier known as the Girdle of Melian, and will require significant power to breach. As for Nargothrond, while Morgoth knows the kingdom is in West Beleriand, he doesn't know where exactly it is. Fortunately for Morgoth, the elves of Nargothrond are about to do something very unwise and offer their kingdom to him upon a silver platter. In this video, we talk about the Battle of Tumhalad, the dumbest battle of the First Age. In 472 of the First Age, Morgoth won a decisive victory at the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. In the west, High King Fingon was dead, the power of Hithlum was broken, and the Easterlings were sent to occupy that land and enslave the remaining inhabitants. In the east, the Feanorians were scattered, the fortress of Himring was abandoned, and the wide lands of East Beleriand were open for conquest. But while ultimate victory was perhaps assured, it was not complete. After the Phalas was destroyed in 473, three major elven kingdoms still stood against him: Gondolin, Doriath, and Nargothrond. Despite his overwhelming advantage, it wasn't as simple for Morgoth to just attack and destroy these three kingdoms. In the case of Gondolin, Morgoth had no idea where the kingdom was located. Genuinely, he didn't know whether it was in the north, south, east, or west. In the case of Doriath, it was protected by the Girdle of Melian, described as an invisible wall of shadows and bewilderment that could do serious harm to anyone who attempted to cross it unbidden. So if Morgoth wanted to destroy Doriath, he would have to send forth a power that was greater than Melian. Maybe Sauron, but in all likelihood, Morgoth might have had to go forth himself, something he wasn't keen on doing. Nargothrond was a slightly different story, although no less frustrating for Morgoth. Unlike Gondolin, he knew that Nargothrond was somewhere in West Beleriand. For example, when he destroys the Phalas, he sends his army through Nevrast to avoid it marching through hostile territory where it could possibly blunder into a massive ambush. That said, he didn't know exactly where Nargothrond was in West Beleriand. He'd had very few interactions with Nargothrond till this point, nor was it his top priority. And the Elves of Nargothrond did a great job of not advertising themselves. For one, Nargothrond was built mostly underground in a series of caves above the river Narog. It certainly wasn't in plain sight. The other important factor was how the elves conducted themselves. They operated in secrecy, doing their utmost best to conceal troop movements. When orcs did manage to cross into Talafdirnan, the guarded plain, the elves of Nargothrond would not openly march forth to meet them. Instead, they would ambush them wherever they could. For obvious reasons, orcs hated going into Talafdirnan because how can you fight an enemy that you can't see, nor know where they are coming from? So through the 470s and much of the 480s, Morgoth's progress grinds to a halt. His forces have some successes on the marches of Doriath, but it doesn't really matter because they can't get into the forest. Despite the overwhelming odds stacked against them, the men of Brethil continue to contest the crossings of the Teiglin. Even when the orcs do get past them, they then end up in Talafdirnan, where the elves of Nargothrond pick them off. In 486, another problem arises. Turin sets up his outlaw band at Amon-Ruth and founds the land of Dor Coathol, further fortifying West Beleriand against Morgoth's forces. Dor Coathol, perhaps protected by no more than a couple hundred outlaws, is the weakest link, and in 489 the outlaws are destroyed and Turin is captured. However, Turin is rescued by Beleg Strongbow of Doriath and Gwyndor, a noble of Nargothrond who had been held prisoner in Angband for the last 17 years. During the rescue, Turin accidentally kills Beleg, but nonetheless it's successful and Gwyndor resolves to take the broken Turin back to Nargothrond. This ends up being a massive mistake. Turin Tirambar, the protagonist of The Children of Hurin, was a strong yet highly flawed individual. He was good-looking, charismatic, empathetic, a capable commander, and a seemingly unkillable warrior. Because of this, he quickly became a powerful figure within Nargothrond and was admitted into the council of King Orodreth, who had seemingly been a capable leader so far. Unfortunately, the combination of Orodreth and Turin did harm to both. Orodreth's constant deference to Turin inflamed his pride, and in turn, Turin revealed Orodreth to actually be a somewhat weak and indecisive leader. Before Turin's arrival, the hope had been that if Nargothrond remained secret, there was a chance that it would stand long enough for help to arrive from Valinor. But Turin was scornful of this idea, saying that the Valar had abandoned them. He also had little respect for secrecy, saying that it would not avail Nargothrond because sooner or later Morgoth would find them, and they would meet an inglorious end, smoked out like cornered rats. Instead, he advocated for open warfare, because every decisive blow struck against Morgoth's forces wherever they gathered would buy them more peace, and even if they were brought to ruin, at least they would go down in glory. Gwyndor would always argue against Turin, fiercely advocating for secrecy, but it was to no avail. Turin would become Orodref's chief advisor, and eventually commander of Nargothrond's entire military, while Gwyndor would fall out of favour. With Turin in command, Nargothrond started to stockpile weapons, and more importantly, a bridge was built over the river Narog so Nargothrond's forces could march out in greater numbers. Now, whenever orcs crossed into Talath-Dirnan, the elves of Nargothrond were there to meet them openly. With the construction of the bridge and the brazen troop movements, Morgoth quickly discovered exactly where Nargothrond was. In early 495, Morgoth started gathering an army in the Vales of Sirion, to be led by Glaurung, the First Dragon. This was known to Nargothrond, and also to Gelmir and Arminas. They were messengers in the employ of Círdan, and were bearing a message from Ulmo to Gondolin and Nargothrond. They did not find Gondolin, but their message to Nargothrond was clear. Ulmo's power is retreating from the rivers, Morgoth is coming, throw down the bridge and abandon your open war. Orodref was displeased with this message, and Turin was, well, straight up just an asshole to both of the messages. He would reject the message entirely, and the bridge was not destroyed. To the north, things took a turn for the worse. The orcs moved to secure the crossings of the Teiglin so that the army could advance, but the men of Brethil would not have it. Lord Handir gave them battle, and Lord Handir was slain. But fortunately for the men of Brethil, their forest was not the target. The orcs secured the crossing, and in autumn, Morgoth's great army advanced over the river. They first moved northwest, burning the valleys south of Eredwethrin and defiling the pools of Ivrin, but then they moved south into Talath-Dirnan. Glaurung set fire to all of the lands as he went. The army of Nargothrond marched out to meet them. Make no mistake, this was not a pitiful host. Nargothrond had been the strongest kingdom in Beleriand for years, and could possibly rally as many as 20,000 or more soldiers. Their morale was high, mostly due to Turin himself, who looked a tall, powerful figure as he rode beside Orodref, wearing his terrifying dwarf mask. The battle gets a single paragraph because it was a one-sided slaughter. The elves advanced north, but quickly found that their scouts greatly underestimated the size of Morgoth's army. Pressed in on all sides, they fell back, but were eventually forced to give battle at Tumhalad, a plain between the river Narog and Ginglith. Turin was unstoppable, and only he could withstand the approach of Glaurung. Unfortunately for him, he did not lead an army made up of other Turins. Orodref was slain in the forefront of the battle, Gwyndor was mortally wounded, and the host of Nargothrond withered away. Turin managed to gather some survivors and led them to Nargothrond to defend the city, but by the time they arrived, the city had already fallen. The battle had been such a disaster that by the time word got back to Nargothrond, there was not enough time to destroy the bridge over the river. Glaurung gladly strode over it, broke the doors of the city, and it was thoroughly sacked. When Turin arrived, the prisoners were already being led out, and seeing that any effort to save them was futile, Turin's remaining soldiers fled. Turin alone strode out to deal with Glaurung, but the dragon hypnotized him, causing Turin to head back to Dor Loman in an attempt to save his family, who were no longer there. To put it bluntly, the Battle of Tumhalad was not a battle that needed to happen. The elves of Nargothrond had a working formula. For 18 years they had relied on secrecy to combat Morgoth's forces, and for 18 years Morgoth made no progress towards conquering that kingdom. This only changed when Turin arrived. The young man was so capable, but also so sure of himself, that he managed to convince the king and most of the people in the kingdom that his way was actually the right way. He arrived like some prophet, brainwashed the people, and then led them to their doom. And make no mistake, he was leading them to their doom. As I said earlier, at this time, Nargothrond was the strongest elven kingdom. their power had been swallowed by many refugees fleeing from other elven lands, and they had also hardly participated in the other battles of the First Age, so their losses had been fairly small up until that point. But if the combined armies of the Union of Maedhros, Hiflum, the Thalas, Brethil, the Feanorians, and even some of the dwarves had failed to defeat Morgoth 20 years earlier, then what chance did Nargothrond have, a single kingdom arrayed against the entire might of Angband? Even thinking that it would be possible to defeat or even delay Morgoth through some open military might was foolish at best. It becomes even worse when you consider how wasteful it was, and how Nargothrond's army might have been used in a much better way. The Battle of Unnumbered Tears was Beleriand's final throw of the dice to reinstate the siege of Angband. With the exception of the small company led by Gwyndor, Nargothrond did not participate in this battle. A seemingly good idea in hindsight, considering how the battle ended up being a huge disaster. But with the Battle of Tumhalad being no less of a disaster and being far more pointless, it makes you wonder, what if Nargothrond did help the Union? If they contributed, say, 20,000 soldiers, that might have been the difference between victory and defeat, and it might have seen the siege reinstated, and Beleriand safer for a while longer. Thinking back through all of the battles of the First Age, and even the other ages, I can't think of a dumber battle than the Battle of Tumhalad. Sure, other battles were disasters too, but at least those battles were either necessary or had an achievable goal. Even the Battle of Unnumbered Tears ticks both of those boxes. The Battle of Tumhalad had neither. The battle didn't need to be fought, at least not at that time. Maybe sometime down the road Nargothrond would have had to fight in the field, but that day was possibly years away if not for Turin's meddling. As for an achievable goal, like I said earlier, if the entire Union couldn't defeat the armies of Angband, then what hope did Nargothrond have alone? For that reason, it's the dumbest battle of the First Age. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. I do find it amusing how Tolkien treats his battles. Some of his battles, like the Unnumbered Tears or the Fords of Isen, receive a ton of detail. Meanwhile, other battles basically just get a sentence or paragraph where it says, they won and it was really glorious, or it was bad and everyone died. Cheers, farewell, and remember, if you ever feel like you're being treated like crap at work, just think about how the soldiers of Nargothrond felt, most of them likely thousands of years old, when a man in his late 20s was appointed to command them.